At my grandfather's 75th birthday party, suddenly asked, "Can someone explain why strangers are living in the mountain cabin I bought for Olivia?" Every conversation stopped. I felt my stomach drop. "What cabin?" I asked. My grandfather turned toward me, confusion spreading across his face. "The cabin near Pine Ridge." I blinked. "I don't own a cabin." The room fell silent. I swallowed hard and added, "I'm renting a room above a mechanic's garage right now." Across the table, my older brother Ethan suddenly looked like he had seen a ghost. 3 years earlier, my grandfather had accepted a long-term engineering contract overseas. Before leaving, he pulled me aside and told me he had arranged something that would help secure my future. He never explained what it was. I assumed it was a savings account or some kind of investment fund. After he left, our communication slowly faded. Messages became less frequent. Letters stopped arriving altogether. I convinced myself he was busy. The truth was far worse. At the time, I was working 2 jobs just to survive. During the day, I handled customer service calls for an insurance company. At night, I stocked shelves at a grocery store. Money disappeared faster than I could earn it. My savings account rarely climbed above a few $100s. Meanwhile, Ethan seemed to be thriving. He and his wife, Vanessa, constantly posted photos online. Weekend trips, expensive restaurants, home improvement projects. One post stood out, a beautiful log cabin overlooking a lake. Vanessa had captioned it, "Our little escape from reality." I remembered staring at the picture for several seconds before scrolling away. I was too exhausted to wonder how they could afford it. Then my grandfather returned home months earlier than expected. He didn't tell anyone. Instead, he drove directly to the cabin he had purchased years before. When he arrived, an elderly couple answered the door. The couple politely explained they had been renting the property from Ethan for almost 3 years, paying him every month, completely unaware that the property legally belonged to someone else. That someone was me. Within an hour, my grandfather had contacted a lawyer. Within 2 hours, he had learned that nearly every letter he sent me had been intercepted before it ever reached me. And by evening, he called me personally. His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that usually came right before an explosion. "Olivia," he said, "I need you to attend your grandmother's birthday dinner on Saturday." I sat up straighter. "Why?" "Because some people in this family have been telling lies for a very long time." There was a pause. Then he added, "And I'd like everyone to hear the truth together." Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I walked into the restaurant feeling completely out of place. My brother and Vanessa were already there. So were my parents. Nobody paid much attention to me. That changed when my grandfather entered. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a tall man carrying a leather briefcase. The lawyer. My grandfather sat down at the head of the table. For several moments he said nothing. Then he looked directly at Ethan. Before dessert, he said, "I'd like to discuss Olivia's cabin." The color drained from my brother's face. Vanessa nearly dropped her glass. The lawyer calmly opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. Every document inside carried my name, and for the first time, I realized my family wasn't worried about being exposed. They were terrified. My father looked like he wanted to disappear. Grandpa sat calmly at the end of the table, scrolling through his phone. "You keep saying nobody interfered," he said. "Would you like me to read what was actually sent to me?" Dad didn't answer. Grandpa adjusted his glasses and read from the screen. "Don't transfer any money directly to Olivia. She's reckless with finances." His voice remained steady. Then he read another message. "She's overwhelmed right now and not capable of handling major responsibilities. Leave everything regarding the cabin to us." The room had gone completely silent. My mother stared at Dad in disbelief. "You told him that?" she whispered. Dad rubbed a hand across his face. Still no answer. That was answer enough. But then things got worse. Mom turned on him immediately. "We agreed to watch over the property until Olivia got settled," she snapped. "We never agreed to make her look incompetent." Dad shot to his feet. "And whose idea was the rental agreement?" he fired back. His finger pointed across the room. "Who introduced Marcus's parents to the place? Who said we could make some money from it?" The second the words left his mouth, he realized his mistake. Everyone did. My sister, Claire, slowly turned toward our mother. Mom's face drained of color. Within seconds, they had stopped defending themselves and started blaming each other. 3 years of secrets were unraveling all at once. I stood quietly and watched. For once, I wasn't the family scapegoat. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't begging anyone to believe me. They were exposing themselves. Attorney Brooks waited until the shouting died down. Then he calmly closed the folder in front of him. "I believe ownership has been established." His voice was almost boring in its professionalism. "Now we can discuss consequences." He looked directly at Claire. "You have 2 paths forward." The room fell silent again. First option: full cooperation. Financial records are turned over, funds are repaid, and the matter can potentially be resolved privately. Then he paused. Second option: litigation. Nobody missed the warning in his voice. Claire crossed her arms. "What if I don't agree to either one?" Attorney Brooks didn't even blink. "Then we proceed accordingly." Grandpa finally spoke, and somehow his calm voice was more frightening than everyone else's shouting. "Then we start discussing the house you're currently living in." Claire froze. Her husband slowly turned toward her. "What does that mean?" Grandpa opened another folder. "The down payment for your home didn't come from your savings." He placed several papers on the table. "It came from rental income generated by property that never belonged to you." The room went dead quiet. Her husband stared at the documents. then at her, then back at the documents. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. For the first time all evening, Claire looked genuinely afraid. Not embarrassed, not angry, afraid. Because she finally understood she couldn't talk her way out of this one. 3 days later, Grandpa picked me up before sunrise. "We're taking a drive," he said. An hour later, we arrived at the cabin. The first thing I noticed was the lake. The second was the realization that the place was beautiful. Much more beautiful than the pictures I'd seen online. I stood there staring. For years, I had thought that view belonged to someone else. Instead, it had been mine all along. The couple living there welcomed us inside. Their names were Walter and Irene. Within 20 minutes, it became obvious they had been deceived just as thoroughly as I had. Every receipt had been saved, every payment recorded, every conversation documented. When Walter learned the truth, he sat quietly for almost a minute before speaking. "So we've been paying rent," he said carefully, "to someone who wasn't the owner." Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The documents answered for us. I expected anger. Instead, I saw disappointment. The kind that comes from realizing someone you trusted never deserved it. By the time we left, copies of every document had been made. The legal case was becoming stronger by the hour. That evening, my phone buzzed. "Claire." Then another message. And another. The first was friendly. The second was emotional. The third was guilt. By the fourth, she was angry. Finally, after discussing it with Attorney Brooks, I agreed to meet her. A public cafe. Middle of the afternoon. Crowded enough that nobody could cause a scene. Claire arrived 10 minutes late. She looked exhausted, but I had known her long enough to recognize the performance. The tears, the sad smile, the dramatic sigh. They always appeared whenever she wanted something. After a few minutes of small talk, she slid a document across the table. "I think we can solve this." I looked down. A proposal. Not an apology. A proposal. She wanted me to keep the cabin. In exchange, I would drop all financial claims. No repayment. No legal action. No consequences. And somehow she expected me to share future rental income with her. I read the page twice. Then I looked up. "You took money from property that wasn't yours." Her expression tightened. "You lied for years." Tighter. "You watched me struggle while benefiting from something that belonged to me." Now the mask was starting to crack. "And your solution is for me to reward you?" The sweetness vanished from her face instantly. She leaned forward. "This is the easiest deal you're going to get." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because only Claire could steal from someone and still believe she deserved a commission. That was the moment I knew the meeting was over. She hadn't come to make things right. She had come to save herself. The meeting ended with signatures. Not arguments. Not threats. Just signatures. One by one, Claire signed every document her attorney pushed in front of her. The repayment agreement. The waiver of ownership claims. The disclosure forms. Each stroke of the pen felt like another piece of the truth becoming permanent. By the time the final page was signed, nobody in the room looked victorious. Just exhausted. Years of deception had finally reached a point where there was nowhere left to hide. As everyone gathered their belongings, my grandfather rested a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. For a long moment, I wasn't sure I believed him. Doing the right thing had never felt particularly rewarding before. Usually, it meant sacrificing something. This time, it meant refusing to sacrifice myself. Outside the building, the winter air felt sharp against my skin. I stood beside my grandfather's car while everyone else slowly filtered into the parking lot. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I already knew who it was. My mother stopped several feet away. For once, she didn't try to justify anything. She didn't make excuses. She didn't blame someone else. She simply looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from realizing you can't undo years of bad choices. "Olivia," she said softly. I turned toward her. "I'm sorry." The words hung between us. Simple. Late. But real. Her eyes filled with tears. "I should have protected you." I didn't answer. She nodded slowly as if she understood my silence. Then she whispered, "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me." I thought about that. The old version of me would have rushed to comfort her. The old version of me would have immediately said everything was okay, but it wasn't okay. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. So I gave her the only honest answer I had. "I don't know." She closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. And somehow that felt more genuine than any conversation we'd had in years. A month later, I moved into the cabin. Officially. Not as a visitor, not as a guest, as the owner. The moving process was almost embarrassing. 3 boxes, 1 suitcase, a folding chair. That was the entire inventory of my life. When I carried the last box inside, I stood in the middle of the living room and laughed. Not because it was funny, because the house felt absurdly large compared to everything I owned. Walter and Irene remained as tenants. By then, we had developed an unexpected friendship. The rent was adjusted to something fair, and they insisted on helping me settle in. I lost count of how many times I told Walter he didn't need to carry anything. He ignored me every single time. The first night felt strange. The house was quiet. Peaceful. No tension, no criticism, no feeling that I needed to shrink myself to avoid upsetting someone. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. For years, my life had revolved around survival, finding enough money, finding somewhere to sleep, making it through another week. Now there was nothing demanding my attention. No emergency waiting around the corner. The silence felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. Around midnight, I wandered downstairs and found Irene sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea. She smiled. Couldn't sleep either. I laughed. Not really. She nodded knowingly. Sometimes safety takes longer to get used to than hardship. That sentence stayed with me because she was right. The following months changed everything. I finished paying off old debts. I reduced my work hours. Then eventually left my second job altogether. My grandfather helped me return to school and finish the degree I had abandoned years earlier. Technically, it was a loan. He insisted on paperwork. When I asked why, he smiled. Because someday, you're going to succeed. And when you do, I expect every cent back. I knew what he was really saying. He wasn't giving me charity. He was giving me confidence. As for Claire, her life became noticeably quieter. The expensive vacations disappeared. The social media posts became less frequent. The image she had spent years building had cracked. Some people learned the truth. Others didn't. I stopped caring either way. For the first time, my future wasn't connected to her choices. My parents slowly started reaching out. At first, I kept my distance. The wounds were still fresh. Trust doesn't return simply because someone apologizes. It returns because people consistently earn it, and that takes time. Sometimes my mother drove out to visit. She and Irene would sit together in the kitchen talking while preparing lunch. I never stopped them. Healing wasn't the same thing as forgetting. I had finally learned the difference. My father came less often. When he did, he spent most of his visits quietly staring at the lake. One afternoon, he stood at the end of the dock for nearly half an hour before speaking. No, he said. Still looking across the water. For years, I convinced myself I was helping the family. He shook his head. The truth is, I was helping the people who demanded the most and ignoring the one who never demanded anything. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked at me. There was sadness in his eyes, but also acceptance. You deserved better, I nodded once. Not because the pain was gone, but because, for the first time, somebody had finally said it out loud. The lake rippled gently beneath the afternoon sun. The house stood behind us, and for the first time in my life, it truly felt like home. Dad stood beside me at the edge of the pier for a few more moments. The lake stretched endlessly in front of us, calm and silver beneath the afternoon sky. Finally, he nodded toward the house. I'm glad it ended up with you. I looked at him. For years. Those were the words I'd wanted to hear, not because of the property, because they meant he finally understood. Thank you, I said. Neither of us added anything else. Some relationships don't return to what they once were. Sometimes the best outcome is simply peace. Grandpa moved into the house permanently that spring. He sold the apartment he had kept overseas and never looked back. Spent enough years living out of suitcases, he liked to say. His room was at the end of the upstairs hallway. Every morning we sat on the back deck with coffee and watched the sunrise spread across the water. The difference was that I wasn't the same person anymore. Back then, I had spent most of my life staying quiet. Now I talked, I laughed, I argued when I disagreed, I took up space, and nobody made me feel guilty for it. The strangest part was what happened afterward. I finished my degree. Then, I started helping other property owners manage rentals and vacation homes. At first, it was just my own property. The neighbors started asking for advice. Then, referrals started arriving. Within a couple of years, I had built a small business. The irony wasn't lost on me. For most of my life, people had insisted I couldn't handle responsibility. Yet the moment I was finally given a chance, I discovered I was actually very good at it. The problem had never been my ability. The problem had been the people benefiting from my self-doubt. About 8 months after the settlement, Claire came back. I saw her car pull into the driveway while I was organizing paperwork in my office. For a second, I considered pretending not to be home. Instead, I walked outside. She stood beside an aging sedan that looked nothing like the luxury vehicles she used to drive. She seemed smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. Life had stripped away a lot of the confidence she used to wear like armor. Can we talk? She asked. I waited. She looked uncomfortable. Then she finally admitted why she had come. Her divorce was nearly finalized. Bills were piling up. The repayment agreement was becoming difficult. She shifted nervously. I was hoping maybe you'd consider adjusting the terms. There it was. The real reason. Not reconciliation. It's not accountability. Another request. Another attempt to make her problems my responsibility. I listened quietly. When she finished, I thought about all the nights I had spent worrying about money, all the meals I'd skipped, all the buses I had ridden because I couldn't afford anything else. Then I gave her the same answer I had once needed someone to give me. The agreement is the agreement. Her expression hardened. For a second, I saw the old Claire, the one who always believed rules existed for everyone except her. But the moment passed. She looked away. For the first time, she seemed to understand that manipulation no longer worked. Not because I hated her, because I'd finally learned boundaries. Without another word, she got back into her car and drove away. I watched the dust settle behind her tires. Then I went back inside. And that was the end of it. Not with a dramatic confrontation. Not with revenge. Just a closed door. Years later, people sometimes ask how I got through everything. The answer always disappoints them. There wasn't a single moment that fixed my life. No magical turning point. No grand speech. Healing happened in small pieces. A morning coffee on the deck. A rent payment honestly earned. A college class completed. A phone call I no longer dreaded answering. Little things. Thousands of little things. One evening, driving home from work, I found myself stopped at a red light near the bus station. I used to use years earlier. I looked over and saw people waiting exactly where I once stood. Back then, I measured my life in survival. Every dollar mattered. Every setback felt permanent. I remember thinking I would never get ahead, never own anything, never escape. The light turned green. I drove on. Not in an expensive car, not in a luxury vehicle, just a reliable car I'd bought myself, paid for with money I had earned. I followed the familiar road toward the lake, toward the house, toward the life I had built. And somewhere along the way, I realized the greatest thing I recovered wasn't the property. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even justice. It was trust in myself. For years, other people had told me who I was, what I could do, what I deserved. Eventually, I stopped listening, and that changed everything. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch lights were glowing. Grandpa was inside making coffee. The windows reflected the lake behind the house. Home. My home. Not because my name was on a deed, because for the first time in my life, I knew my value didn't depend on anyone else's opinion, and nobody would ever take that away from me again.